Well, the Saints have restructured the contract of Derek Carr, somewhat reaffirming that he's going to be the starting quarterback in 2025. Hey guys, John Hendricks here of Second and Saints and Athlon Sports. Going to talk a little bit about the contract, give some thoughts, to kind of just break it down a little bit. And obviously, this is something that we're not really that surprised about. If you've been tuning into our show with Ross and I, we've been saying that this is kind of what we were expecting a little bit, that Carr was going to be the quarterback. It's what we learned about in scouting combine, but we said this months before that, this is kind of the play. I think the uncertainty of a new coach, all this other stuff happens, and then you're suddenly saying, okay, well, is he going to stay, right? And of course, Kellen Moore's opening press conference didn't really give that. It was more of a non-committal answer as to whether Carr was going to be their quarterback or not, but changed quickly when it came to the combine. And then so on the Saints side, they said, this is our guy. They think, or Mickey Loomis specifically saying that they think they can win with Derek Carr. Kellen Moore talks about his rhythm and tempo, likes that a lot in Derek Carr, and thinks that he can run his offense. And so, again, I putting on the organization hat. That's really what we were doing, is that this is what they were kind of thinking, and this is what the play was, right? And again, I kind of go back to this being kind of their final run at everything, with presumably keeping DeMario, Tyron, and Cam Jordan on the roster, which again, this is Saturday, March 8th. New league year is March 12th. A lot can change here. But Derek Carr's contract is one of the biggest dominoes that could fall for the Saints, right? And he was due $40 million on the third day of the league year. So $10 million of that was a roster bonus. $30 million was in his base salary. Now they get to restructure. It's going to free about $30 million. But what you're doing is you're pushing that to 2026. So Carr's salary cap hit is going to be north of $69 million. That's a lot, right? And again, I know people say kick the can, do all these other things. And the thing is, as I've always said, the criticism is valid because it hasn't worked for the Saints, right? Like 5-12 the year before, no playoffs, no playoffs. I mean, you're going 4 years without the playoffs. I mean, what do you expect, right? Like this strategy hasn't worked for the team, right? And they could have done some other things with Carr. They could have gotten creative with the contract and stuff. Restructuring was always built into his contract. So it's not like a matter of, well, do you want to restructure your contract or anything? No, that was already built in there. The thing he said at the end of the locker room access into the end of the year was the fact that he was not going to take a pay cut. He said, go put on the film, all this other stuff about what he's been able to do in New Orleans. And so, again, he's going to be your quarterback one in 2025. And I think aside from everything else, right? Like I think now this is you're pushing these chips in and saying we're going for the division now, and now you have to be able to back that up, right? You can't use the injury excuse. Honestly, you can't use the first year head coach excuse now, because you're going with a team that you feel like can compete for the NFC South. Now they got improvements to make. They got all sorts of things that they have to do. The draft is going to be huge. But the thing is, this year, 2025, again, tracks their direction, their moves right now track with everything that we have been talking about and writing about, all that other good stuff. So that's not really that surprising. Ross and I on the last episode, don't forget to go back, check that out, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. The thing that Ross and I talked about is what's the plan beyond this year, right? What is the Kellen Moore's plan for the quarterback position, right? Because you're not going to keep Carr at $69.2 million, right? You're just not. Like, and the thing is, they'll have to figure out if they're going to do a post June 1st. They're going to have to probably eat some dead money, all this other stuff. I mean, again, that's next year's problem. But realistically, what is the direction? Because the Saints didn't plan really for Drew Brees' exit, right? And I'm sorry, I keep walking, some hair getting in my face. I've got to do something with this. But the thing is with Derek Carr and the plan, or sorry, Drew Brees and the plan after that, it didn't work, right? Like you just weren't prepared, right? They didn't develop anybody. They thought the free agency route was going to be there, and it looked good for a while, right? Like it looked like Jameis Winston could be their guy, and unfortunately the injury never happened, never changed. Then Sean Payton leaves, Dennis Allen comes in, then they get Andy Dalton, and there's a whole entire thing between them. And so it's just been a carousel. And so now the biggest thing I think for the Saints is you got to figure out what you're going to do in 2026, right? Like you have to, maybe it's not top of mind. I don't think it totally rules out them drafting a quarterback, but they, at some point, they got to show whether they're committed to Spencer Rattler in the future or they're going to get the next answer in. But, and they could very well go to free agency in 2026. But the thing is, having a plan in place, because it's decent. Like you can go push your chips all in, but what about beyond that? Like, are you just going to try to go for a 1 year wonder sensation and see what happens and then do this all again next year? I don't know. I think that's what's fascinating about this team. And look, I get it. Now, it's when Ross and I talked about this, it was what we thought was going to happen. Now, if it's the right play or not, only time's going to tell, right? I think that's the biggest thing. And I know the fan base is divided on Derek Carr. I know that there's a lot of things going into that, right? Like he had the injury, and the Saints, even Darren Rizzi saying last year that they didn't win a game without Carr. I mean, yeah, fair, but you're also missing 18 million starters too. I mean, it's just one of those that's like, it's a weird stance sometimes, way that things are said and taken and all this other stuff. But again, they're making this push. Now that they've made the decision, the results have to match, right? Like you've got to make the playoffs. You cannot be a 2-7 team like you were last year. You cannot go start hot, then hit the wall, and then all this other stuff. I mean, this has got to work if you're the Saints. I think this puts pressure on Mickey Loomis as a GM. It does put a lot of pressure on Derek Carr, and it does put a lot of pressure on a first-time head coach in Kellen Moore. Like you're going to be expected to deliver, right? I think that's kind of the message that you're sending, and that in some aspects, running it back with a different coach, different coaching staff. I mean, maybe a different defense, obviously, is what we're expecting under Brandon Staley swapping to 3-4. But this is kind of what you're saying on the surface level. Now, they've got some moves to make. They got to figure out their offensive line, left guard specifically. I think that's a huge area. I know people talked about Mekhi Becton if he comes available. I think there's some other options that could present themselves. And definitely check out Athlon Sports Saints coverage. I wrote about that, and you can get some of my thoughts there. But they got to figure out this defensive thing, because offense went through all their stuff at number 9. When they pick, they could go tight end weapon like a Tyler Warren. Is Tedeora McMillan there? Is Ashton Genty there? I don't know. I mean, I think that's the thing. Shooter Sanders, if he drops, do the Saints look at him? It's everybody can say everything under the sun, right? The Raiders trading for Geno Smith obviously takes them a little bit out of that equation, I think, for the quarterback spot. But it's kind of like, I guess, the same way with the Saints is like, do the Raiders not go look at somebody because they got Geno Smith and traded for him? I mean, it's kind of almost the same premise as what you're saying with Derek Carr in some aspects. But look, he's got to play better. He's got to be available. The Saints have got to play better. They have to play defense. They have to win these games. Again, they're going to have a really interesting schedule, right? Like you've got the NFC West. You're going to have the AFC East. You got to go play up in Buffalo, go play in Miami. You got to beat superior teams. And that is something the Saints just have not been able to do over the past several years. You just have not been able to do that, whether it's Derek Carr starting as a quarterback or not, and whether it's the defense falling or not, or whether it's just all these things. Like there is a real problem with the Saints when it comes to putting it all together. And that's the thing that we have yet to see from this team, which was so good for the Sean Payton teams. Like they could put this all together. They could make it all work. Like, and I think a lot of that started with him as a head coach. And I think that's what you're hoping for from Kellen Moore. Now, look, again, this is going to be a thing where everybody's divided here on it. Yet, the bottom line is Derek Carr is in line to be quarterback 1. And again, like Ross and I talked about on our other show, if I'm Spencer Rattler, I'm making sure I'm ready, right? Because Carr has had some injuries to his career. And, I cited the injury that happened against Kansas City. That was just kind of a fluke injury, I guess, but it sidelined him for a while. So if I'm Spencer Rattler, I'm going into this year and thinking, I better be ready at a moment's notice to step in if I have to, and when I might have to, right, and such. And so I think this will be a good year for him. Doug Nussmeier is their quarterback's coach. I'm interested to see what they do as far as their offensive scheme, how Spencer Rattler progresses a little bit. I think we forget about Jake Haener because of what happened last year with him. And then, of course, they got Ben DiNucci on the roster as well. He's worked with Kellen Moore in Dallas, all this other stuff. So, again, for the Saints, quarterback, as they've said for years, is the most important position. This is how they're viewing the most important position, is that they're going to stick it out and ride with Derek Carr in 2025. Again, this is what they said at the combine publicly. And again, all the information I've had, what the biggest hang up was on is his contract, right? Like, the Saints had that belief. And then from what I understand, it was told that, on Carr's side, that was something that, the comments at first kind of maybe didn't really sit well, is what I would say. And in the contract, they had to figure that out. And again, there was multiple ways to deal with it, but the Saints chose with the restructure option, if you will, and such. And so, it made sense. That was always built into it. But will it work? Only time will tell. But that's the reality of it. New league year starts on Wednesday. Legal tampering opens on March 10th. That's Monday. So it'll be something to pay attention to, whether the Saints have some new people that they're interested in, or, you can only negotiate with agents of players. And what happens with Chase Young, Paulson Adebo, Juwan Johnson, some of their own. That's another one to keep an eye out. But fascinating times if you're with the Saints. And look, I understand one way or another how you feel on this team, but we'll be here to cover it regardless. So thanks for tuning in. Really appreciate it. Don't forget to support Ross on Locked On and LouisianaSports.net. Again, check us out on Athlon Sports, LSU coverage, as well as Saints. Thanks so much for your time. Appreciate you.